Okay. Afternoon all. We've still got a few more people joining as we go, but I think we've got about 44 people in the session so far. So good afternoon and welcome. My name is Mel Mills and I work for Big Society Capital, and I'm going to be your host for this afternoon's Let's Talk Good Finance and Housing. Couple of bits and pieces. First things, just in terms of some ground rules. It'd be great if when you've entered you can just put yourself on mute. We do have the power to mute, but it just helps for any background noise and just for no distractions. If you're willing and able to put your camera on, that's always great for us speakers. I spend a lot of time looking at myself on Zoom and talking to myself, which is not a great hazard of this job currently. So if you're happy to have your cameras on, that is really great. And Emily's going to post some more things in the chat, just in terms of there'll be different links and guides, but also what we're really looking forward to seeing in the chat this afternoon is the questions that you have for the panels. Also, it would be great, we've got introductions, but please feel free to introduce yourself in the chat, not so much so that we know who's registered, but perhaps so some of the other attendees can see who are on this call this afternoon. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm actually going to do some introductions, tell you what's coming up on the agenda this afternoon. I'm conscious that Emily's so good at multitasking. She's letting people in and doing the slides all in one go, which is really good. Okay, so this afternoon's session, we are running in partnership with the National and Community Lottery Fund. And when I've just done introductions for the other speaker, I'm going to hand over to Susan. She's going to tell you why we're working together. So this afternoon's agenda, I'm going to tell you who's going to be speaking. You're going to hear a little bit from me about what is social investment, and then we're going to go to the main part of the session. No pressure, everyone's speaking, but the hear from a peer panel is always the best, most valued part of these Let's Talk Good Finance. So we're going to cover big deals, small deals, owning and leasing, owning property, leasing and using property to support the creation of impact. And this afternoon, you're going to be hearing from Lisa Hilder at Preston Road Women's Centre. You're also going to be hearing from Theo at Rene House CIC. And yeah, we've got two for the price of one this afternoon. We have Lee Jagger and Ince from Charity Bank, who are going to be talking about some of the deals that they've invested into. 3 o'clock, we're going to have a very short comfort break. So that's time to use your own conveniences, quickly go and put the kettle on and get a cuppa and gear yourself up for this afternoon's Q&A panel. I do find that they're the most valuable parts of these sessions and the most interactive. So please do keep those questions. As people are speaking, just pop your question in the chat and we'll keep an eye on it and we'll definitely come back and post those questions for you. Towards the end of the session, we're going to come back and do a little bit of a social investment update. We'll perhaps reflect on some of the questions that have been asked and some of the lessons that we've learned from social enterprises and charities around the country that have taken on social investment. And then we're going to do a couple of bit of interactive polling using a tool called Menti at the beginning of the session and at the end of the session, which we'll talk you through. And at 4 o'clock, there's an optional networking. So if there is somebody that you'd really like to spend a bit more time with, or if you want to talk to one of the speakers on a one-to-one or a one-to-few basis, you can hang around at the end. And if by that stage you feel like you've got lots of knowledge about social investment, you can take the time and go and do something else with it. Okay, so before I move on to what is social investment and doing the Menti, I just hand over to Susan from the National and Community Lottery Fund just to say why we've worked together on this.
Thanks, Mel. Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us today. Just to kind of echo what Mel's already said there. One of the reasons we've pulled this together is within the National Lottery Fund, we are involved in social investment, and I'm part of the social investment team. I actually manage the growth fund within the National Lottery Community Fund, and what I'd noticed was that we'd started to get quite a lot of enquiries from small groups through our regional teams that really centred around housing, and we were getting applications and things coming in for housing projects. And it seemed like a really good opportunity to bring together a collection of people to tell the story of how social investment can be used, perhaps alongside grant monies. build housing stock, to use capital assets to draw in some kind of investment and get repayable finance. So that's kind of where we are in relation to it. And I'm really looking forward to what comes out of this this afternoon, and hearing from other investors there and other groups that have made use of social investment in relation to this. So I'll hand back to Mel, and you know, obviously at the end I'm happy to take some questions and have conversations with people, like I think the other panel members will be. Thanks, Mel.
Super, thank you, Susan. Thank you. Great to see some introductions coming through in the chat. And also, I suppose the other unwritten rule I normally always end up saying is there are no silly questions. You know, this is supposed to be the warts and all. You know, this is the chance to ask peers the things that you're thinking and think nobody else will know the answer to, or you just not had the opportunity to ask. So, you know, if you're sitting there thinking that you've got a question, not sure whether to pose it or not, I'm absolutely positive there'll be somebody else on this call. We're nearly 50 people now who'll be thinking the same thing, so please do. So we're going to move over and we're going to try out this tool called Mentimeter. I don't know if you've used it before, but you can access this in a couple of different ways. So you can either use the link that Emily has posted in the chat. You can scan the QR code that's on your screen now, or you can go to menti.com and type in the number that's on your screen, which is 53851294. So we normally allow people a little bit of time just to get on to Menti. If anybody is struggling with it, do let Emily know. Emily, are you going to share the interactive live, or are we going to?
Yeah, I will just give everyone 1 minute to scan that QR code, and then
That's fine.
share.
It takes a little bit of, so you've got multiple ways to get there, however you feel most comfortable. Direct link, menti.com, and type in 53851294, or if you've got a scanner, you can just scan the QR code. It's like a little interactive survey or polling that we can use, and we use it quite a lot, but we are aware it's moving from one bit of tech to the other. Okay, so the first question we ask you is, why have you attended today? So this is, you can see lots of things for the people that are here. So to learn more about social investment, to learn more about the subject, opportunity to understand more about how social investment could help community groups, inform property acquisition strategy, curiosity. Yeah, we like healthy curiosity. There's lots to learn and understand how other mission-driven organisations are utilising social finance. Great one, because it's all about peers, isn't it? I think that one of the things that we've learned from running lots of Let's Talk Good Finance is, although we know that social investors and, you know, people who work in social investment space like Jez and Lee, I can tell you, are very approachable. They are professionals, and there is just something about hearing some peer advice and support. So yeah, lots of different reasons that you can see that people are attending today, which is great. And then we're moving on to the second question. So on a scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your knowledge of social investment? It's not going to give your name, by the way. This is just your, so 1 represents no knowledge, 10 represents you're very well informed, and it's really just to give us a scale for everybody that's here. We've got like 18 people so far, where the understanding in the group is, and that certainly helps us as we go throughout things. So Nicola wanted the code again, which is, I'll give that to you. It is 53851294 on Menti. Does that help? Yeah, so we've had 36 respondents so far, which is good, and we're looking about 4.8, 4.7. We've been hovering around that sort of mid mark there. So we've obviously got varied rates of understanding, but it's good to know where we were at the start here. 39. We'll give it 1 more second. Yeah, it's pretty good actually. I think we've got 47 and we've got 40 people, so actually that's pretty good. So I think we're finishing at 4.9. I shall remember that. 4.9. Okay, great stuff. Right, I'm going to do a quick whistle-top skip and tour through a little bit of background about social investment. not take too long because I know we want to get onto the main event. Nobody really wants to listen to me, but I'm just going to tell you a little bit about what social investment is. Okay, so how does social investment work and what is social investment? Well, I could spend the whole of this afternoon trying to do that. And it is about charities and social enterprises who can generate a surplus or a profit. I'm quite happy to use the word profit through trading activities, contracts, grants and donations, and usually a combination of all of some of these. And then this is where this profit or surplus is then used to repay investors. And we spend a lot of time saying this, that social investment sits alongside donations and grants as another tool in the financial toolbox and trying to give you enough knowledge to understand when it's relevant. Now, as I said, I could spend all afternoon talking about this, but you don't need to worry because we have a really super short 1 minute, 0.34 seconds long video that's going to do it much better than I can. So we'll switch and we'll just watch that first.
Across the UK, charities and social enterprises like yours are tackling some of society's biggest problems. Maybe you've set up a coffee business to give people the skills to get back into work, or are running a nursery and using the profits to support local parents. Whatever your mission, you'll need money to help with cash flow, to grow your organisation, or to buy an asset like a new building. You might even need finance to kickstart your new venture. And that money could come from traditional grants or donations, or as a loan from your local bank. One option is to get that money from a social investor. That social investor could be an organisation or an individual, and you can borrow their money or offer them shares in your organisation. But what makes a social investor different? Well, they don't just want to see a return on their investment. They want to see their money being used for good, helping you to keep delivering your social mission. Sound good? To see if it's right for you, check out goodfinance.org.uk.
Super, thank you very much. Now, if you think at any time I don't remember all of that or I want to watch that again, you can find that short animation on Good Finance under what is social investment, so you can show it to somebody else in your organisation if you want to. So let's just go over the role of social investment. I always say that there is good news and bad news, so it doesn't matter whether you're in the Highlands of Scotland or down in the lowlands of Cornwall, social investment can work. It isn't only about one particular geography or one particular social issue area. And we know that social enterprises and charities are dealing with some of the most challenging issues in the UK. So being able to access all forms of support and knowing when they're most relevant is essential. Social investment is the use of repayable finance to help an organisation achieve a social purpose. And so again, anybody that's heard me speak before will say, if you leave with only one thing from today, it'll be that social investment is not a thing in its own right. It's just a tool to help create impact. And that's what's really important to know. Okay, so what the research says, I don't think you'll be particularly surprised by these things. So these stats either come from NPC's Charities Taking Charge research or Social Enterprise UK State of the Sector survey, Capitalism in Crisis. So charities, 31% said funding was the most important tool to help the sector increase its impact. Over a quarter of charities had set up a trading subsidiary, showing the move towards more commercial models. And interesting, 43% said that access to finance is the biggest obstacle to sustainability and growth. And that is finance of all types, so grants, debt, which are loans, and equity, which are shares. Okay, it's fine to say all that. That was all before this thing that happened last year, the pandemic. And, you know, there's a whole new range or lens of complexity that the pandemic threw at us. So, you know, charities facing a huge drop in funding as a result of COVID, and the commercially trading organisations, one with trading arms, facing huge dips in revenue from not being able to continue operating their organisations in the same way they had done so. Alongside that, you've got huge growth around social impact investing, which has grown around 6-fold. So I've been at Big Society Capital about 6.5 years. So increasing from around 830 million in 2011 to now 5.1 billion. And I think if there was a time during the pandemic, I was really worried about, whether people would still need and be able and want to borrow money. I can tell you that, that we haven't seen that come true, that there is still plenty of appetite to take on investment out in the world of social enterprise and charity. And the other thing that I think is definitely worth knowing is if you think that social investment is only for big, large sums of money for large organisations, then think again, because the average investment first-time need for a social enterprise or charity is around £50,000, and what everybody wants is patient, so that means it takes a while for you have to pay it back, affordable, so not too expensive, and risk-bearing capital. So that's what the sector wants. Okay. So if you are thinking about social investment, or if you're trying to work out whether social investment is right for you, the key considerations, we would say 3 steps. You need to think about the purpose. What do you need the money for? And we often talk, and we're going to come back to this later, around these 4 categories. Do you want to buy an asset? Do you need money to maintain cash flow, particularly if you've got something like an outcomes-based contract, a payment by results contract? Do you want to kickstart your business? Notice I didn't say start up. I'm not going to say that there is never social investment money for starting a business, but you often need to have done the proof of concept, which is where grant or an incubator might come in well. But if you want to just take the next step on, then kickstart your business. And then growth and innovation, those both are often where people have done the proof of concept and really want to ramp up the scale of delivery. So number 2, first of all, you need to know, number 1, what you need it for. Number 2, you need to think about how you're going to pay it back. So is there an income stream with a surplus? And it could come from a range of things: government contracts, rental income, membership fees, even some donations or fundraising. Sometimes social investors will take a proportion of that into consideration and trading. And then number 3, as important, and probably what differs most from maybe a grant funder, a social investor is not going to tell you what outcomes you need to hit, but they will want to know what social impact you're going to create. So you need to be able to tell the story and the numbers around who will benefit, what activities and outcomes you're going to do. In other words, very simply put, what difference will the money make that you're being lent? Okay. So there's a lot more information on the different types of investment. I often find that social entrepreneurs and charity leaders, we're all passionate about making a difference. So what we want to do is we want to get from A to Z as quickly as possible. So we want to go from A, yes, we think this is something we want to do and we might need to borrow some money, to Z, who can lend it to me? Well, actually, there is a little bit of work you need to do in the middle, which is that not all social investors do the same thing. So you need to try and work out what type of money and what type of financial product, and then you can work out which investor you might need to speak to. So very simply put, we probably divide this into 2 pieces. There are probably 2 main types of investment: debt or loans, you might hear them talked about, or equity and shares. Now, some social enterprises and charities are unable to give away equity or don't have shares, and so mainly only have access to debt type of lending. But there are some other terms, things like blended finance and quasi equity, that you might hear. Now, whenever we use these sorts of language, we're very aware that this sounds like a lot of jargon. So we do pride ourselves at Good Finance in having a jargon buster, which we will post into the link to into the chat, where you can find out more about what these terms mean. There are 2 main ways of getting social investment. You can get them either from an organisation, so specialist social investment firms, social banks or trusts and foundations who do grants and social investment, or by borrowing from individuals, and that might look like things like crowdfunding, community shares, community social investment tax relief, or angel investors. Lots more information on Good Finance that you can deep dive into these to find out a bit more. I am 1 minute on time, unheard of, and that's good because, as I said, I'm definitely not the main event here. We've done around about 60 or 70, I think, of these Let's Talk Good Finance since I started at Big Society Capital, and this Hear from a Peer session. We call it the warts and all journey to social investment. And it's the opportunity for you to hear from people who've done this themselves. It's not, you know, spin or speak from people who want to essentially need to get loans out the door. This is the experience of social entrepreneurs and charity leaders who have had the opportunity to learn. And so we always encourage them to tell you the good bits, the bad bits, and then you will have an opportunity after 3 o'clock to ask them some of those questions. So I'm going to stop talking. Now I'm bang on time and over to Lisa.
Thanks, Mel. Yes, well, rest assured, I'm not going to show anybody my warts, but hopefully we'll be able to talk you through the journey that Winner the Preston Road Women's Centre has undertaken to get to where we are with social investment. So my name's Lisa Hilder. I'm the treasurer for Preston Road Women's Centre, and I've been involved with the centre since its inception about 20 years ago. And as you can see on the slide, we're about creating sustainable solutions for women and children in Hull. Can we have the next slide, please, Emily? Thank you. So what do we do? We deliver a whole range of services as part of our integrated service model, from crisis intervention to recovery. And predominantly, we work with women and children who are fleeing domestic abuse. So we have a specialist domestic abuse support service, safe dispersed accommodation, which is funded substantially through social investment. And currently we have 221 dispersed properties across the city of Hull, ranging in size from 1-bedroom flats to 5-bedroom houses, that we let to women and kids fleeing violence and abuse, and we provide wraparound support from those properties. We also have, Affordable Justice, the family law firm that we established in 2016, and that provides legal services to women, and again, predominantly around those fleeing domestic abuse. We have an on-site nursery for 0 to 5s, which draws in social enterprise income. We offer accredited training, a comprehensive volunteering programme. We've got a charity shop on site, and last but not least, we offer services, participation and empowerment to young women. So as you can see, there's a whole range of services that operate in a way that's interdependent under one roof, and a large proportion of our work is around providing safe accommodation. Next one, please. So why is social investment important? Why have we found it important? It was really important to us to find an alternative to grant and contract funding. We saw the writing on the wall about 15 years ago now, in terms of the gradual reduction in those sources of funding. And I'm sure plenty of organisations on this call have lived that. And we wanted something that was going to sustain us into the future, because we know that domestic abuse is never going to be solved by a short-term revenue-based project. So in terms of social investment, we looked at something that was asset-backed. So, for example, the assets that we have bought, i.e. the properties that we let out, which helped us to grow our balance sheets across our group of companies and bring financial sustainability. It's been a direct route to scaling up. So we started small with some blended finance in 2007 with 10 properties, but through various tranches of social investment, we've been able to scale up to our current 221 properties. And very importantly, the ability to generate unrestricted income through letting out our properties has helped us to increase autonomy over service development. So we're no longer constrained totally by the criteria that come with contracts and grants. So we've cut some of those strings attached in terms of the money that comes into the organisation, and that helps us to be incredibly responsive to the needs that come with the women who come through our doors. We determine how we want to develop our services, because that money doesn't come with all of those strings. Next one. So the problem, as I've alluded to, was a 20% growth in demand over the last few years, and funding to women's services being decimated nationally as a result of public funding cuts over 10 years of austerity. And that's a familiar picture to a lot of voluntary sector organisations. And the problem was that the short-term revenue funding was trying to address long-term social need, and the two didn't really add up. So the light bulb moment was when we thought about, how do we extend our planning horizon? How do we generate sources of income that are much longer term? And because the women who were coming to us before we started buying properties were saying, the accommodation I'm being offered is terrible, it's decrepit, it's in isolated areas, we thought there's got to be a better way of doing it. And that led us to thinking about buying and managing our own housing to service that need. Next one. So solution, short to medium term, continue to access short-term grants and contracts. They clearly have their use, and we do still apply for some grants, but we're able to be more selective about that now. But in the long term, generate sustainable income streams based on the lovely term sweating capital assets acquired through social investment. And as I've mentioned, we acquired another one this week, so it is 221 dispersed units of safe housing, which not only meets the needs of our beneficiaries, but gives us that revenue stream in perpetuity to fund our services. And also we were looking at social enterprise models to deliver services, notably affordable justice and our nursery. So one of the things that we did as part of our social investment journey is to link in with social and sustainable capital. We applied for some blended finance that they had at a point in time, and that particular deal didn't come off. However, they were particularly interested in what we did and how we did it, and wanted to see how we could develop a working relationship that enabled them to achieve their social impact aims and enabled us to scale up our housing. So between us, to cut a long story short, we co-produced a financial product, which is whole property finance. It's an interest-only loan over 10 years, with an option to buy in year 10 at year 1 prices, so the price that's paid at the beginning. There's no fixed interest rate, so the investor return is based on overall surplus, i.e. whatever's left after the bills and the property management fees are paid. The cash to purchase the properties is provided up front, and the properties are owned by us, so they sit on our balance sheet from the beginning. Critically, there's no need to fund the 30% deposit that a bank would require, and that dramatically reduced or got rid of the revenue risk for us. So we have comfort that all the costs associated with the property will be paid. That particular product was designed around our needs, And initially we took £2 million to buy 35 properties. And subsequently, as that concept was developed into the Social and Sustainable Housing Fund, we took another £3 million as the first investee into the fund, and now it's growing towards £100 million available in the UK. So we have in total £5 million worth of investment into our housing that's been provided by Social and Sustainable Capital. And in total, that's provided 82 safe homes for women and kids, and provided us with an ongoing income and a very healthy looking balance sheet. Next one. On the back of that, I've done some work with Big Society Capital to help in the development of the Women in Safe Homes Investment Fund. And that is a lease-based model that does what it says in the tin, looking to offer properties to women's sector organisations to provide safe accommodation to women and children in vulnerable scenarios. So it could be women and kids fleeing violence and abuse, or it could be women rebuilding their lives after being in prison, or who have vulnerabilities for other reasons. And it's a partnership between an investment fund, the women's sector organisation, and it aims to create the safe accommodation that generates the social impact for beneficiaries and for organisations that want to provide that sort of housing. It's also looking to help to create a step change in the sector by enabling women's organisations to generate an income through property management and build on those leased properties in order to then purchase their own property assets in time. And we're working with Wish at the moment at Preston Road Women's Centre to lease an additional cohort of properties just outside our geographical area. Next one. So the outcomes, the so what. The way in which we work with our integrated service model enables women to make permanent breaks from the perpetrator first time round. On average, a woman will leave and return 7 times to a violent relationship, and a big reason for that is inappropriate accommodation. So when we work with them, they make that permanent break from the perpetrator when we make that intervention. It helps us to plan our services away from the short-term revenue cycle. We have autonomy to be responsive to need. It brings us operational and financial sustainability, and that brings us organisational stability and longevity. So by starting down the road of social investment, it's brought us all sorts of benefits. It's not always been easy. It's been hard work, challenges. Anybody who's managed property knows that there are wild cards that crop up all the time, but ultimately it's been well worth it in terms of achieving our charitable purposes. Next one. Yes, so the overall message I wanted to give you is that it can be done, and you can start and grow at your own pace. So now we have a large property portfolio, but you don't need to start with a couple of hundred properties. In fact, you can build over time and develop a blended portfolio that suits your organisation and what you want to do. So I shall pause there.
Lovely, thank you, Lisa. That's I've seen that before, but I'm still always, I'm still always inspired when you talk about it being, alongside some of the journey with you. And also, we often hear The social investment is very London centric. Who said it couldn't be designed in Hull, hey? And
Absolutely.
rolled out across the UK. So and it always takes just one person to get off the block with asking the questions, and they're rolling in now, which is great. But we're going to hand straight over to Theo, and he's going to take us through Rene House's experience of social investment and maybe where you are in your journey, because we're trying to give you a full range. So over to you, Theo.
Right, can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah, sounding good to me.
Right, can everyone see this okay? The screen sharing that I'm doing?
Yeah, screen's
Cool.
going well. And
so so what I've got to present is Rene House. We are a community interest company, and after following the last presentation, I think it's quite interesting because we are possibly the total opposite side, where we are 3 years, coming up to 3 years into our journey. We have a similar sort of model. So our basic model is properties, and the pictures cycling through our residents that we support, some of the support sessions that we do, some of the properties that we have, etc., etc. So we are based in Nottingham, and we provide supported housing for homeless single adults and families that have additional support needs that make it hard for them to live alone. So this could be anything to do with being an ex-offender or having issues with substances, or any range of things that come along with being homeless. So our focus is to create really good quality housing. And again, it's been mentioned in the last presentation that often when people get put into services through homelessness, the quality of accommodation is one thing that we always hear that is lacking. So we wanted to make a real focus on having nice properties where people come in for however long they're with us, they feel like this is home. So we've been, like I said, we've been trading since August 2018. I work alongside my partner Tiffany, and the idea for us to start this those couple of years ago started when we went to an event. We both wanted to have our own organization, our own company, but we went to an event where a friend was helping out people in Nottingham city centre. He was promoting a company that he was doing, but he wanted to do something sort of in line with helping people. So he teamed up with a soup kitchen, and we went down just to support him because he's a friend. And at that point, I'd had no real interactions with people who are homeless or people who have experienced that kind of that side of life. So I was admittedly quite oblivious to the situation, but after going there and spending a couple of hours just talking and having this epiphany that homeless people are no different to everyone else, they're just going through a rough period or whatever, it just sparked something in the both of us. We already had a massive interest in property, so I've got a background in sort of sales and marketing and helping people with finance and mentoring. I've done a lot of different things, and my partner's Tiffany, she's had a lot of experience in health and social care. So we thought between us we had enough to go forward and really try and make a difference. So the customers the customer is the local authority, so they're the ones who pay us, but obviously our end users, we call them residents. So these are the people who are most important to us, and it's everything that we do, we want to make sure that it's in their best interests. We chose to go down the route of being a CIC as well, as opposed to a charity, because we just decided that it was better for flexibility. And I think, again, it's already been mentioned, and talking to people who do operate these models as charities have found that they end up creating a company anyway. So we just saw the CIC structure as a nice middle ground. It's not a limited company. You can't, there's certain regulations where it makes it more difficult, but having a CIC is it's within the middle. So you're showing outwardly that you're focused on creating that social benefit for people. So looking specifically at the social investment that we've had, before we went for the investment, we were already in receipt of grant funding, and that's helped us to grow from where we are. So currently we're at 28 units. So we've had money from National Lottery, being one of the big ones, and more local grant funders as well, ranging from £5,000 to £25,000. So that's been helpful, but we just wanted to grow a little bit quicker. So we reached out to Big Issue Invest, and initially that was to buy a property. But because, again, being quite young, we didn't quite have the turnover and that we didn't have the cash flow to justify. I didn't feel comfortable going forward, and the way that it would have been structured would have meant that the money that we would have needed to put up front would have been too much. So we went away, kept working on things, kept growing it, and came back, and we decided that we wanted some money to help us grow a little bit quicker, because, again, ultimately we do want to get to that stage where we ourselves are 20 years down the line and we've got a healthy portfolio of properties that we own. So what we decided was that we went back to Big Issue and asked to borrow some money to help us with cash flow. So we currently are using the lease model. So all of our properties are leased through private landlords. So yeah, we went back to Big Issue, and they granted £10,000 and then also 50k in a debt loan. So in total, our borrowing was 50k. Our total money that we got from Big Issue was 60k over 5 years, and that was at 8%. But the good thing about the deal that we got through Big Issue was that it's really flexible. So up to now, we've only actually taken on half of that. So it means that we're not paying for part of the facility that we don't actually need. So it's meant that we're not paying extra on top of money that we're not actually using. So it's been really flexible. And again, for me, the person out of the two, of myself and my partner Tiffany, I'm the person who deals with more the financial side. So I've not been through the process of raising finance before, so it was quite difficult for me to start with. So it was quite fortunate that with Big Issue, specifically, I know there's a few different organisations, but especially with Big Issue, they were able to provide someone who gave a lot of support through putting all the right paperwork together, making sure that all the numbers were correct and made sense, and things that I found quite difficult, especially going through it for the first time. It was broken down, and even going through the process, the regional lending manager was really patient with me, and we're now in a position where we've got money that we've been using to grow our service, and I know that we've got more money that we've got access to keep growing. And obviously, for those who are working in exempt supported accommodation, sometimes working with councils, generally anyway, getting the money coming in, going through all the paperwork and actually getting that money paid can be quite a bit of a gap. So that's the money's been really helpful. But yeah, I think that sums it up really. I think just some pros and cons. So the time from when we made the initial contact to getting the investment was around 2 years, and that was for a number of reasons, because initially we went for one thing but ended up going for something else, and I think just the time in between. So if you are going for financing, then make sure you don't leave it till you actually need it. Go and start getting the paperwork and start making inquiries well in advance. The due diligence as well, there's going to be lots of due diligence. So again, just make sure you've got all your paperwork and stuff in order, and just try and ask in as far advance as you can as to what's going to be needed. And yeah, I think that's some of the things that I found a bit frustrating, but again, it's a learning, something that we've learned from, and going forward we're in a much better position now, and hopefully we can get to that point where we have our own portfolio.
Lovely, thank you, Theo. That was brilliant, and actually that's the whole point, actually, in getting Lisa at one end of the spectrum and then hearing from you about your journey, and showing that, you know, you have to start somewhere and you have to sort of get on. And also, I was thinking lots of things you were talking about just in sharing your top tips. When it comes to my 7 lessons learned, I feel like I've almost paid you to set me up for those. So lots of things you were saying in there are the things that we hear. I did think I'd make you laugh though, because not many people I've heard actually enjoy due diligence. Lots of people say what you've said, you know, there's lots of questions. You know, I do hear a lot about patience from social investors as they help you through it. It's in their interest to help you through it. Most people haven't done it before. But I have actually just found one person who enjoyed due diligence. You never guess where she lived. In Nottingham. And that hasn't happened very fast. There's something about Nottingham. I need to team you two up, because, yeah, she enjoyed it. That was the only time I ever heard somebody go. The dynamic duo that we have this afternoon, we have Jez and Lee from Charity Bank. So Charity Bank is a social investor, and they're going to give you some examples of the sorts of deals they've invested in, and then hopefully we'll have the whole range laid out in front of all of our investors this afternoon. Okay, over to you two. Jez,
you're on mute still. Schoolboy error. Oh. There we are.
There we go. Hopefully you can all see that now and hear me, which is a bonus. Just to introduce myself and Lee, first of all, we're both relationship managers with Charity Bank, and our job is to work with prospective borrowers to help, I suppose, investigate if loan finance is right for the organisation and will help you further your social mission, and I suppose also right for the bank. There we go. A brief bit of information about Charity Bank. We're an ethical bank that's owned entirely by charities and social purpose organisations. We've been going about 20 years now, and our mission is to use savers' money for good. So we take savers' money and we lend it to charities and social enterprises to help them further their mission. We're entirely owned by the charitable sector, and every one of our investors is either a charitable trust or a foundation or a social purpose organisation. And there's just a list of some of our investors, which does include Big Society Capital. Thank you very much. So what do we look at before we make an investment or a loan? There's 4 key things. The social investment, how are you going to use the money and how it will help further your mission and what difference it will make? Can you afford to make the repayments, because it's not in the interest of the organisation or the bank to make a loan that's going to cause difficulty? The governance or the management of the charity or business. You know, do you know what you're doing, and can you manage the project successfully? And we make secured loans, so that means that we take a mortgage over the asset that's being invested in, or other properties that the business owns or charity owns. And we have the right to sell that if the charity defaults on the loan repayments. Pleased to say that during my 10 years with Charity Bank, we've never enforced, to my knowledge, we've never enforced on any of our security, but we do have the right to do that. Okay. I think the most important thing that and exciting part of this presentation, and certainly from my job, is the opportunity to work with a whole range of different charities and community groups. And I was just looking back over the last few years, and I think I've worked with Charity Bank to help leverage over £50 million of loans. And a lot of that has been towards housing and housing related projects. And one of my favourites is featured in this case study was to the Hudswell Community Charity, which is a Yorkshire Dales village not too far from where I live. And because it's a beautiful village located in the Yorkshire Dales, it attracts lots of people in buying houses for second homes, which makes it really difficult for the locals to actually buy property. So, one of the things which a local, the village charity looked at was how can we address that need? And I happen to own a field which was used for grazing of sheep and horses in the middle of the village. And the first step of that project was to complete a housing needs survey to determine that there definitely was a need for affordable homes in the village. They then secured a grant from the local authority, and that was matched with some of their own reserves and a loan from Charity Bank to build 3 new affordable homes for residents of the village. It wasn't a quick process. And as I say, we've talked, I think, briefly about blended finance. So it wasn't just debt, it wasn't just their own money, and there was some grants in there. So it was a whole package of finance, and that's very common with a lot of the projects that we fund. Anyway, they appointed some professional advisors, a local contractor, and they commenced building the houses. And they built 3 wonderful stone cottages in the village. And these houses are now complete and offer homes to people with local connections at affordable rents. And there's also, been wider benefits to local businesses in terms of helping to keep the village alive, and and people from the town and the locality actually living in the village. The rent used to repay the loan and to support other local services, in that the financial surplus that those assets have generated have also been used to help support the local community shop. So, a good example of how a small local charity has used housing, for social good and used social investment and grants as part of that journey. So, case study number 2, another women's project, a charity that helps support young women that have been the victim of sexual abuse or exploitation. And they rented their head office, for want of a better word, although it was more like an administrative base, that also provided upstairs some accommodation for women. And they'd rented that from the local authority for many years, but there'd been talk about the local authority wanting to sell it or dispose of that asset. So they were always worried that they were going to be thrown out. So they came to talk to Charity Bank and said, Jeremy, what about, instead of renting it, is there any chance we could buy this? Now, they'd managed their finances prudently for many years and got some reserves. And they'd also, the local authority, in recognising the good work they were doing, were prepared to sell the property at a discount to market value. And they were able to purchase that property, which gave them security of tenure, long-term rental through the supported accommodation that they were providing, and gave them a permanent base. So again, it was a good example of how loans can support an organisation, giving them some security as well as a long-term income from property assets. The last case study is Foresight North East Lincolnshire. They're a charity that look after and support adults and young people with learning disabilities. They provide a whole range of services, but one of the services which they provide is accommodation. And they've used social investment, I think they've had over a period of many years, to help grow, diversify. They've got some investment properties, they've got some supported accommodation, they've got offices, they've got a community centre, they've got a library. So it's and they've blended grants and loans and their own money to help deliver a whole range of different projects using loan finance. It's helped them diversify, it's helped them build sustainable income, and it's helped them reduce reliance on grant funding and local authority contracts. So they're a much stronger and more secure organisation. And their latest project, which is a supported living property in Grimsby, is due to be opened in September. And you can just see them starting. The picture on the left there is when they started on site, probably around 18 months ago. I think it's fair to say it's been that particular project's been a challenge, with some delays and difficulties with contractors. So, developing property is not something that's always straightforward and simple, but if it's managed properly and carefully, can support the growth of an organisation and the strength and the balance sheet, which is something else we've talked about today. So hopefully that's got us back on track time-wise, and as a bit of a whistle-stop tour. I'm going to be disappearing now, I'm sorry to say, but my colleague Lee's going to be hanging around for the rest of this afternoon. And as I say, he's equally experienced in the social investment sector, and I'm sure will be able to answer many of your questions. But my email and phone numbers are there on the screen, so and on our website. So if you want to pick up individually about any particular project, then we'd be pleased to hear from you. So
thanks, Jez. That was great. And I think so we've had Lisa's story from small and then growing to larger, Theo, who's sort of 3 years in. But I always remember, and I quite often talk about Hudswell, because I remember when I first looked at them, they were, the year when they were applying for investment, they were only turning over £13,000, and they didn't have any paid employees. So, if you just want to see the complete range of options that where taking on investment can work for organisations, I think you've had really good examples here. So thanks, Jez. Really appreciate you coming in. A few questions. What Emily's done very helpfully is pulled these together for me. So we've got some around property specifically, some around impact, some around social investment and risk. Let's go for a question for Theo first, and then I've got a joint one. So the question for you, Theo, was it sounds like your key investor is the local authority, because that's the person who's essentially paying you to deliver the service. And this is an observation, I've definitely heard this before. So a lot of supported accommodation schemes tell us that they struggle once the tenants get back on their feet into employment, as the local authority does not necessarily look to support them as they needs require less targeted intervention. So how does your property support those in recovery, say on low incomes to maintain, or do they have to move on? And is there a way that social investment, does social investment help you with that, or does not factor into your model at the moment?
So that is an issue at the minute, but it is something that we are actively looking at solutions for. We've got a couple of ideas, but what we do, we say that once someone gets employment, and we've got quite a few of our lads who have part-time or very casual employment, which is good for them because it gets them out, it gets them a start. But I think once someone reaches a point where they're in full-time employment, which a couple of the lads are, we basically say that we'll subsidise a month or two, and we'll do as much as we can with them to help them find move on accommodation. But I think in Nottingham specifically has been one of the areas where they've seen the highest rent growth in the last 12 months. So it was difficult before, but now it's massively challenging. But I think something that we are looking at doing is working with investors and different organizations to be able to have a model where we can subsidize people for a longer amount of time and create properties specifically for people who are working or low incomes and still need some level of support.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great. So I know it's a challenge. Lisa, you wanted to come in?
Yeah, we experienced that challenge as well. And I think part of the solution for us came with growth. So women come into our supported accommodation and we help them on that journey to recovery. But as and when they go into work and they don't need us anymore, and that doesn't often happen neatly at the same time, what we're able to do is to designate that property as a general needs property rather than a supported accommodation property, so that the woman doesn't have the upheaval of having to physically move house, but we can charge a different rent, which is based on the general needs local housing allowance rather than the exempt accommodation rent. And therefore, she's able to stay in her home. But we've only been able to do that since we've had a significant size of portfolio. But we do find it's something that our tenants really appreciate. Once they've got settled, they want to stay where they are. And that mechanism enables them to do that.
Mm-hmm. So that, as you say, I think there's quite a few people that have said and acknowledged that that's an issue. Funny enough, again, I'm feeling very Nottingham centric today, actually. I do remember, and I think, Lee, this might even before you were at Charity Bank. Charity Bank did invest into quite a significant move on accommodation block, actually, through, I think it was through Framework Housing Association, who are East Mids. But I know that this is generally an issue, but it's great to hear. So here's a challenge, and it's not a challenge that we can all come up with a solution to, but at least it looks like with scale, what Lisa's been able to do is find a workaround for some of that. So hopefully you can both continue to do that. So building on that theme, the question for both of you is, where do you get your properties from? You know, so do you just get them straight from the open market? Do you have you developed relationships with any local housing associations that dispose of properties annually? Yeah, so Lisa, do you want to take that first, and then I'll ask Theo the same question?
Yeah, so when we're buying properties at the moment, we get them from the open market. So we're daily on Rightmove and so on to source the right properties. Previously, we've also done work with the local authority around their empty homes stock. And at one point we had some grant from DCLG that helped us to bring long-term empty homes back into use, and the local authority sourced them for us essentially through council tax records. In terms of the question around housing associations disposing of stock, we've been a bit cautious about that because there's a reason why the housing associations are disposing of certain stock, and it's often either not in the right locations or not of the right quality. So we've not actually gone down that road.
For ourselves, we, again, my partner, I think she spends more time on Rightmove than anything else. So even though we are more looking at we're lease based, so we are looking at properties for rent, but we've also got really good relationships with a number of local and national private landlords who we're almost just sourcing properties. And we've got a couple that are currently going through the buying process where we've got an investor from down south who's come up a couple of times. We do loads of viewings on her behalf, send her videos and whatnot, and then she's gone through and bought two that are going through conveyancing at the minute. We've got another one who's doing the exact same thing, and we have quite regularly landlords again because they're seeing the value that is possible to get in the difference from the prices of down south as opposed to in Nottingham. There's enough value in there for us to create a program that can be sustainable for us but can also provide a good return to landlords. So yeah, we're kind of straddling both sides on properties for rent and properties on the open market for sale.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so Lee, I just wanted to ask you, I mean, we've got a whole host of questions for you in a minute from Charity Bank, but this issue around borrowing money either for supported housing or for move-on accommodation, is there anything that you can add in terms of, you know, types of organisations that either express an interest in this type of money, or things that you're seeing in the market?
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, we work with, nationally, we work with a lot of organisations across the sort of whole of the country, as well as sort of smaller and local and regionally. So we do work with housing associations and social housing providers or registered providers. We see that there's a lot of a mix of acquisition to purchase of properties, but also a lot of new build as well, which is a big part of what we're doing, where we're funding we're providing a lot of development finance for new build properties. For organisations such as that you've mentioned, such as Framework and some of the sort of larger housing associations, and small propositions as well, where Jez mentioned, and the example, the first case study that he mentioned there as well, that it's like two, 3 properties. There's definitely development through COVID did slow down. All new build accommodation did slow down naturally, but we've seen a massive uplift in it since the sort of Q3 of last year. The sector seems to be very, very, very busy in either purchase or new build as well.
Okay, that's really helpful. Right, shall we go to some of your questions?
Yeah.
Give Lisa and Theo just a little bit of a rest before I come back to them. Just for Charity Bank, and then I'll perhaps do some context from sort of wider investors. But for Charity Bank, what's the average sort of loan size that you get approached for? Average repayment period, and I know that it's difficult because each case is different. And what is the minimum loan size and maximum repayment period?
Okay, so it's quite a good one. So minimum loan size 50,000, maximum loan size on our own is 4 million. Anything above 4 million, we will syndicate or go in conjunction with another social funder or a high street bank. So we've got quite a lot of loans out there at the minute that are 10, 11 million pound plus that we've done in conjunction with other funders. Loan terms, anything from 1 year up to 25 years. Potentially looking to extend that to 30 in some instances for certain type of property assets. Average loan size, really hard to say. Everything is very bespoke what we do. We don't sort of have a product suite. We fit everything around the case in front of us, really. So, but anything up to 1 million is probably what we're regularly asked for. Anything above that tends to be for some of the YMCAs that we work with, or the housing providers or registered providers. Some of them may be larger organisations.
Mm-hmm. Okay, great stuff. And I've known you to do stuff from, like, as you say, 100,000 or less for like an Emmaus charity, and then, as you say, the Framework Housing one actually was a syndicated deal with HSBC and Charity Bank having a smaller part of the debt. And I remember it was a very interesting one actually when you listened to who their financial director, when asked a question in a similar scenario to this, is why did you do that? They said, well, there was a slight variation in the price, but we really wanted to have a social lender alongside us, because we felt if things got really difficult, then the social lender definitely shared our values around the social impact, and we thought there would be some more flexibility. So it's definitely one of the things. It's not always just about price, so okay, so there's a couple of questions on the cost of borrowing, and I'll ask you this, and then I'll give some context on some other things around the cost of borrowing. So this is one, obviously, from one of the team at the National and Lottery Community Fund. So it says, are you willing to look at the cost of borrowing in light of increased costs involved in capital refurbishment due to Brexit and COVID? So we're seeing an average 20% increase in capital costs, and if you're not able to look at the reduced cost of borrowing, but also considering extending the length of repayment. Well, you did say you were looking at some up to 30 years, but yeah, just some reflection on those things, Lee.
Yeah, I mean, the cost of borrowing is essentially with us, because of how we're funded and the model that we use, where we save us money and then lend it out, essentially, it means our cost of borrowing is not too far off high street bank levels, which is a little bit unheard of, I suppose, in the sector. A lot of social funders are obviously priced quite higher just to give return to the investors, essentially, but we do, because of how the majority of our funded, our costs are quite low anyway from a lending point of view. If we're looking at development finance, that is priced slightly higher in the initial stages during the build element of it, but nothing like the sort of development finance or funders you're going to see out there in the marketplace. So it's quite competitively priced. For an extension of sort of terms, yeah, I mean, a prime example is the sort of reaction to COVID, I suppose, really. So in essence, we went into a kind of recovery mode and basically looked at repayment holidays, capital and interest repayment holidays, extension of terms, just to help organisations that were lending with us trade through, essentially. And touch wood, everybody, 100% of our client base came through with no issue, sort of thing. So we're quite flexible as a bank. And we sort of pride ourselves on the relationship you have with people like myself and Jez. And if there is issues and things need to be addressed, you tell us first and we can fix it. So we're fairly flexible from that point of view. And it's in our nature to be like that. We were created by the sector to work in the sector, to provide services to the sector. So.
Yeah, I get asked that a lot, and I'll definitely cover that one. But how social is social investment? And I think during the pandemic we saw some really good examples actually of just when the chips are down, how flexible organisations can be. So let me come to one of these questions here, because I think I'd be interested on from all of your perspectives whether you've come across this. And this is about there's a lot of empty properties which owners don't wish to sell, but it costs somewhere between 12,000 and 45,000 to bring them up to a good habitable state. And I know both Lisa and Theo, you stressed how important it is to you to offer some. Actually, Theo, I was thinking you could do some interior design. I was really impressed with some of those. They're looking fab. A lot of the paint jobs. So there's definitely something about the development and refurbishment. So the question is, if somebody has a really long lease, would social investment still be an option in terms of refurbishing properties for rent that aren't owned? Lisa, Theo, have you got any experience of that? Lisa, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we have done some empty homes work in the past. I think it's probably not the first option if you're looking at going into property, because there are lots of additional considerations. I suppose the first thing to say is, yes, it's absolutely possible if you've got a long-term lease, but what you need to weigh up really carefully is the cost of refurbishment of a particular property, the lease fees that the property owner would be looking for, and the income that you're likely to get over the period of that lease, to see whether it all stacks up financially and you can pay your costs as you go along. So absolutely technically possible, quite a bit more complex than a straightforward purchase or lease.
Okay, great. Theo?
So it's not something, we've not actually gone through with any deals, but we have spoken to all of our local councils that we work with, and we have looked at a number of properties. But I think, like Lisa said, I think for us, the deals just didn't stack up. We weren't in a position to buy ourselves, obviously, but for the landlords and investors that we worked with, I think it was just decided that by the time you've gone through everything, and by the time for them to put all of that investment in and the price that they'd want to charge us to lease the property off them, it just made it unsustainable for us. So we've looked at it but not gone through it. Okay,
Lee, anything you want to add? I know it's probably not Charity Bank sort of heartland, and there definitely are some social investors who would probably look at this, but anything you want to add?
Yeah, well, I'd agree with both Lisa and Theo on that one. I think I did a lot of work on empty homes scheme a few years back in a former life at another social funder. But yeah, it's going to be cost effective to do it for you. I think from Charity Bank's point of view, or a social bank's point of view, it is possible.
Oh, I think might just have lost Lee just temporarily.
Leasehold properties, but it's all determined by the length of the lease and private. Oops, sorry. And
carry on. So you cut out for a minute, but then you came back.
Did I? All right. Okay. Yeah. So it depends on the length of the lease. So from a credit point of view, if you want to call it that, if there's, for us, for example, if there needs to be 25 years left on the lease after the loan's expired, so we could provide a loan to buy a leasehold property, but there's still got to be 25 years left on after the loan's expired. So
I mean,
50-year lease for
in short, to answer that question. There potentially are some social investors who would look at it with the length of lease. It's got to commercially stack up with them in terms of the amount of investment you have to bring the property back up, plus the amount of rent that you would then bring on the length of the lease that is left. It probably wouldn't necessarily fall to one of the social banks. It's probably more likely to be in the development and unsecured finance. So you wouldn't potentially be able to borrow at the sorts of rates you would borrow on a secured property. Okay, let's move along. So I'm conscious of time. I want to do at least 5 more questions, and I'll shorten a bit at the end. So let's talk a little bit about risk. We had quite a few questions around risk, which I expect to get, and it's healthy and good that we do so. So a couple of questions about taking charges over the property, which we need to come to. And a couple of bits around the sort of loan to value, the 100% versus the deposit that you might need in another space. So let's go over the taking charges on the property, because I guess we'll have a variety of answers because it depends on which route you use. Let's go with you, Lee, first. I mean, the sort of charity bank most often does secured lending, and for those that are listening, when we talked at the beginning about not all investors doing the same thing, but perhaps you just want to explain what charity bank does in terms of
it's pretty much, consider it like a high street bank if we are a secured lender. So if we're going to lend money, we will take bricks and mortar or a property to secure that loan. And it does tend to be anywhere between 60 to sort of 70% loan to value. So there is a requirement, just like a high street bank, to put some sort of stake in there, etc., or some contribution. Predominantly, if we're working with organisations, it does come via grant funding from Homes England or various other grant providers, which is fine, which we're quite comfortable in working on that basis as well.
Okay. I also will say that I can give you an example, actually. This was nicely done, actually, although I didn't think about it in advance, but this is actually partly in charity banks and partly in big issue invests. Nicely put you on my screen together. So this is where a property bought, again, its head office space and took the 70% loan to value at that stage from charity bank on a secured loan, and took the 30% because they didn't have enough in their own reserves in an unsecured loan from Big Issue Invest. And it's quite common that social investors will work together, as Lee said, syndicated. They will obviously have paid a higher rate of interest on the 30% because that was unsecured, and a lower rate of interest. However, again, this was one of the things that really stuck with me. Their chief executive, Marion, I remember her saying that actually borrowing money saved them money, because when they took both of those monthly payments in, they added to their balance sheet in terms of potentially owning the building, and they paid less rent than they were effectively in repaying their monthly repayments for the 2 loans. So, you know, that's one way it can work. Lisa?
Yeah, so we have a range of different options in our portfolio, but where we've purchased, the lender has taken security over the properties that they've funded, and we're quite comfortable with that. We've got some that are on repayment terms, and as I mentioned, we've got 2 cohorts of properties that are on the SASC/SASH funding, but they're all secured, so the rates of interest are workable for us.
Okay, great stuff. And Theo, obviously you're not using that sort of security, so I wouldn't expect anybody to be taking a charge over those properties. And so I think actually the summary of that piece is it depends. It depends on what type of money you're borrowing, who you're borrowing it from, and the level of risk that's involved. And you will find that, as I said, you know, different investors do different things. So you can find social investment that will allow you to take on and manage properties but not have them on your balance sheet. You will find investors that will allow you to take the secured loans and do that, and then you will find some hybrid schemes, something like Lisa talked about, which is facilitating you to do both things and manage some of the risks around that as well. Okay, just a couple of things that I wanted to put in, and I'm going to come back and talk about some of the things like the cost of capital, the range of borrowing, how social investment. Oops, my phone ring, that's not good. Yeah, so we're also, I just want to talk about, there's a couple of questions in here about new types of development, which I was really keen to do. So this is all about you know, investors in sort of new technologies or new structures, so whether they are sustainable or sort of pod housing, you know, what sort of appetite do we know about for investing in that sort of environmental starter or develop modular buildings? I know there's a couple of, certainly one person up in the sort of Yorkshire and Humber, I've been talking for a long time, been trying to do this. I've also seen some examples of this down in Bristol and down in London. But yeah, any thoughts on sort of less traditional forms of housing? Lisa, have you got any plans?
Well, we have actually. We're halfway through a modular build, new build at the moment. We're building 10 one-bedroom flats on a piece of land that that we own. We looked at a range of options for finance, including options from the local authority who were interested in lending us money. We were presented with quite an attractive option from Unity Trust Bank, but in actual fact we had sufficient in our reserves, coupled with some grant from Homes England, to finance the whole thing. So the short answer is yes. The interest is there from social investors, but in that particular instance we didn't need it. Great
stuff. Lee?
Not a charity bank. I've not really seen a lot in that area yet. In another social fund, yes, we looked at one or two sort of propositions that were a little bit out of the ordinary. I suppose from our point of view, it depends what the asset's going to be, I suppose, really. And it's led via, I suppose, the valuers that can put a value to it, I suppose, essentially, and accessibility to it, if you want to call it that way.
And also risk, obviously, because it depends on where your investors are. Okay.
There could be ways that stuff like that could be done on asset finance, though, or something along those sort of lines, if it's mobile or anyway. Yeah,
there are other ways. I think what we're saying is it's not easy, because whenever you've got something new that's being developed, and it's definitely a challenge, I wouldn't say that it's not possible, but it's definitely not as easily accessible, and I think it's something we'll see emerging as we go through. So I'm going to just wrap this session up before we go to the last bit by asking you all a question. So I'll put you all on notice, and it's a question about impact. So Lee, I'm going to ask you from a lending perspective, you know, how you want people to share the impact that they create, and Lisa and Theo, again, you know, just chat through your experience of this. It doesn't necessarily have to be really technical, but just talk about, you know, how you demonstrate to somebody that's lending you money the impact that's being created. Let's kick off with you first, Lee, and then what we'll do is we'll come to Theo and we'll end Lisa.
Yeah, so I suppose there's lots of elements of impact reporting, as you'll know full well. From our point of view, we want people to actually tell us what they're going to do. So a lot of times people don't really realise what they're doing and recording their impact. So if it is units of accommodation, that's fine. That's direct impact. There's also indirect impact from the services as well, and support services that are provided. And take it a step further, there's local contractors, local suppliers, etc. If it's a build, so there's employment, maybe short term, long time. Anything that anybody thinks we want to know about, to kind of find some way of trying to put some numbers behind it, really, to show genuinely what impact is happening out there. Because I think a lot's not recorded, not intentionally, just, you know.
Yeah, great stuff. Theo?
So we have a range of different ways that we measure impact, because I think coming into this we had no clue, but I think we've grown to it. So we do both resident surveys, and we do service surveys. So the services that we refer to and get referrals from, we get feedback from them on how they're working. We use the homelessness outcome star, and we structure all of our support plans and all of our assessments, and from the moment we meet someone through to them exiting our service, we base everything around the homelessness outcome star. So that means we can create really pretty graphs and stuff like that show practically what we're doing. But then we also just speak to people a lot, and we create case studies. So obviously when I was doing the slideshow, there was a couple of pictures of people who have actually been through our service and moved on and found their own place. So yeah, so case studies.
Brilliant, thank you. And Lisa?
Yep. Everything that the guys have just said. We use a range of different social impact outcomes, from the sorts of number crunching around how many properties do we let, how many women and kids have we housed in a particular year, what are the achievements that they've brought, for example, moving into training or volunteering or work. And we're particularly interested in this in terms of recovery outcomes. So we've actually developed our own outcomes framework that we've been using for the last year or so, that measures the effectiveness of our services and the impact of our integrated service model. And we're rolling that out across our internal services, but also across other local domestic abuse services. So a whole range of impact measures. I guess what I would say is that we haven't yet come across a social investor who's been prescriptive in how we measure impact. There's lots of flexibility and lots of tailoring of impact measures dependent on the type of investment and what they are particularly interested in. So it's very much a conversation and a relationship rather than stipulation from a particular social investor. Mel, if you'll indulge me, there's just one final point I'd like to make about risk, if that's okay. Yeah, so I spotted a question in the chat about risk associated or ameliorated in the SASC deal that I talked about. And that wasn't specifically around the 30% deposit. It was more around the fact that in that model, the cost of repairs, maintenance, insurance and voids is borne by the investor. So that's where our risk really reduces to almost nothing. So as I say, not specifically around the removal of the 30% deposit, although that's enormously helpful and was a removal of a barrier for us. But the risk reduction is around the costs that the investor bears in that particular structure.
Okay, great, lovely. Thank you, Lisa. Yeah, yeah, very important point to make. Thank you, panel. I know I extended the question and answer time because I know once everybody gets going that those are the best bits. So I wanted to get as many as possible. If there are any questions that audience wanted to pose, we've got some networking time at the end. Please feel free to hang around and ask them. But for now, thank you very much to Lee and to Lisa and to Theo. And now I'm just going to demonstrate how many of the things that you've said are clear by just going over the 7 lessons that we've learned by doing lots of these Let's Talk Good Finance and hearing from lots of peers around the country. We're also going to just quickly go, and I think Emily's going to share the screen so we can just talk about some case studies. So today we've tried to give you an example, as I said, of some smaller deals, some bigger deals, some more established organisations, some on balance sheet, some off balance sheet, some secured loans, some unsecured loans. Great to hear as well when Theo was talking, he was actually talking about part grant and part loan, which we would call blended finance, which is via Big Issue Invest, but actually part of what Susan was talking about. Is part of the Growth Fund initiative, where the loan comes from Big Society Capital and the grant comes from the National Community Lottery Fund, and it's delivered through our sister organisation, the Access Foundation, through to social investors. And that's again one of the ways it can be we can help organisations to get on this road. But we've also pulled together a range of different case studies for you. You can check these out by going to Good Finance, and we have the link, which I think Emily will put into the chat for me. But also we've created a PDF, so you can look at a range of organisations. Again, you can filter these by geography or a particular type of lending, but we wanted to give you even more scope. And I thought what was interesting as well, noticed a bit of a chat going on. Yeah, Holywell Housing, we have a podcast from them. They've also done one of these Let's Talk Good Finance for us before. Really interesting way of structuring lending. And actually one of the points in the 7 lessons learned comes directly also you can have a look at something like Your Own Place CIC, which again we have a podcast and a case study from, which is using that quasi equity that we talked about, that sort of equity like type of investment. So again, you know, there are lots of different ways where if you're looking at property, social investment might potentially play a role. Okay, so I think, Emily, we'll go straight to the 7 lessons learned, if that's okay. I'll try and catch up a little bit of time. And I'm going to reflect on that. And then don't forget, we're going to come right back to the mentee, because otherwise I will have failed in my timekeeping, just to see where we've got to. But yeah, our 7 lessons learned are the experiences of different social entrepreneurs and charities from around the country. So let's go with number 1. Social investment is not benevolent money. So you've heard from Charity Bank, you've heard from Theo talking about his relationship with Big Issue Invest, and Lisa, who's got multiple relationships with social investors over the time. You know, it is money that you have to pay back with interest. A social investor, as Jez said right at the beginning, won't want to lend you the money if it's not the right thing to do. The last thing a social investor wants to do is to, if you like, sell you a loan that then means that your business will fail. Because don't forget that the vast majority of social investors are social enterprises or charities themselves, and therefore their money is there to create social impact. They care. Impact matters. We just finished on that in terms of the feedback from all of the panel. I'm going to give you a couple of top tips that I've heard. So there are no numbers without stories and no stories without numbers. So, you know, it's not about producing glossy brochures and reports. It is about being able to say the difference your money makes. Sometimes that will be through case studies or little video snippets. There's so many ways that you can capture this now. It also, I would say, is probably one of the reasons that the outcomes matrix, which is a tool on good finance, is probably one of the most visited resources that we have. It's had over 60,000 downloads, and we're just currently working on updating it actually to bring in some additional filters and things that our users have told us. So what I would say about impact is you need to start somewhere. Don't think it's so complex that you can't start. You need to start somewhere, and it needs to be proportionate and it needs to be relevant. So again, you know, don't start with social return on investment. If you're a small organization, start with finding 5 things that really matter to you, and measure what you value. Yeah, don't value what you measure. Number 3, it's about much more than the money. Theo, you did a great job for me here talking about the relationship you have with your investment manager. And I know that Lisa's got lots of experience of this. And probably if I could wheel out any of the case study speakers that I've had for Charity Bank in the past, they will all say this. I do have a lovely clip on a video case study we have from a community interest company in Bury St Edmunds, and their CEO. I promise you we didn't pay her to say this. She said, when I borrowed money, I thought I was going to be borrowing it from a faceless investor, and instead I got you. And I think what that says is throughout, I find that social enterprises and charities find that the relationship we have with their social investor isn't just based on borrowing the money. There was again some great quotes, and this is the one that I got from Holywell Housing that talked about the flexibility, restructuring the loan, helping to find board members, going into contract negotiations. There's lots of things that a social investor is potentially prepared to help and support you with. Honesty is always the best policy. What happens when it goes wrong, when things don't go according to plan? Again, another one from Holywell who said, we structured the deal, we planned it all like this, and then everything changed in terms of our contract with the local authority. So Lee said this, and I hear it from all social investors. If things are going wrong and you cannot make your repayment this month, do not avoid calls, pick up the phone and speak to your social investor. When COVID hit, every social investor that we know of that was in our portfolio, Access's portfolio, got on the phone and spoke to all of their investees. And I think that level of support and that level of flexibility has made a huge difference to organisations that was so much unknown. Why isn't it cheaper if it's social? You know, I get people saying, well, if it's social investment, then surely the more impact I create, the less that I pay. Actually, the amount that you pay, and there was some discussion around the cost of capital here, isn't directly due to the amount of impact. It's often dependent on the amount of risk that an investor is able to take. The risk that an investor is able to take is often rooted in where they get their money from. So if you are somebody like Charity Bank, who has the deposits of other charities and social enterprises, we want the money to be protected for them, so there's potentially less risk. Then maybe if you are CAF Venturesome, where the money is philanthropic at source, and therefore potentially you can take a bit more risk. I would say that if you're taking what is considered to be the less risky end of lending, so secured lending, you'll pay somewhere probably between 2 and 5%. So usually it's something just above base rate, a percentage point above base rate. If you are looking at unsecured lending, somewhere between 6 to 8%, often if there is either a government-backed guarantee or a tax relief in there, or blended capital, blended finance with some grant in there, that might be considered to be a mid-range, but certainly you can pay more than that, and you can pay upwards of double digits, so 10% and onwards. It all depends on who is lending and you know, where you can get the money from. I would really urge you, if this is something that you want to understand more, we produced some new resources on good finance. I know Emily's already shared the link around a cost of capital, why it costs, what it costs, and also some great tools that help you, like a cost of capital calculator if you're thinking about borrowing money. Due diligence isn't fun, but it does make your business better. Yeah, I shared that with you about Theo, people not enjoying it, and then Sam posted some great comments in the chat, which is true. There's an upside, definitely. I have known organisations say, well, I didn't necessarily enjoy it, but it definitely made my business better. I've also found organisations that maybe didn't go on to take the investment but still came away with some really good disciplines. So I think that it's a process that you should be prepared for, and you should work together hand in hand, and don't see it so much as a test, but see it as a tool to grow your organisation, the impact. And Theo, you did this one for me brilliantly. It always takes longer than you think. Don't wait till your back's against the wall. You know, a social investor, and I've known Key Fund, for instance, who lend sometimes smaller amounts of money, been able to turn loans around in 6 to 8 weeks. But it really depends on not only the frequency of which the credit committee meets to make those decisions, how quickly can you get together all the information that's required so it can go to panel, but also when is actually the organisational need. So yeah, definitely don't leave it until the end. Okay. So I think we're coming to the final wrap up, and I think that Emily's going to take us back to Menti, and we're going to ask you to just log back in, and we'll post into the chat both a link and the QR code. I'm not sure if it's the same code to get back in. And we're going to, oh yeah, see there, I like that one. I thought that said soggy something, but it doesn't, it says soy. So you can either use the link that's in the chat to get back into Menti, or you can go to menti.com and you can use the code to log in, 53851294. So I'll let you take a little bit of a chance to get in there. And what we're going to ask you to do is to repeat the exercise. So when we started as a group, we were around about 4.9. We spent quite a lot of time this afternoon listening to lots of peer stories and find a little bit more. And what we're now looking for is to find out where you're at. So I think we were about 49 when we logged in at the start. We're on 39 at the moment. So we're climbing steadily, and we'll just see to where we got to. I think it's really important when you do something like Let's Talk Good Finance. There's some great information that comes out, but none of us are supposed to be experts. I certainly don't consider myself an expert. There's still things I'm learning all the time. But what we hope that this will give you enough appetite and enough insight to A, know where to go if you want to find out more information, which there's lots of tools on good finance. B, you'll know a little bit more about social investors. If you want to find out who's investing, who does what, where they invest, what sorts of types of investment they do. You can find that on the fund mapping tool on the investor and advisor directory on Good Finance. And if you want to hear lots more of these case studies to hear from our peers, as I say, we have a whole range of podcasts that you can go back and listen to some other features, some other organisations who featured. So we're up at about 24. Don't know whether we're going to get anybody else log in to Menti, but essentially we've gone from 4.9 to 7 in this 2 hours, which I think is just demonstrates some more progress. And I do hope for many of you that we've busted a few myths, we've whetted a few appetites, we've provided a little bit more information and insight, and we will of course follow up with all of the slides, with any of the speakers' contact details if they are happy to share them, and also with a recording on demand unless you want to go back and listen to something or share it with somebody else in your network. I think we're probably there. 4 minutes to 4, so we're doing okay on time. Everybody's been very kind. Speakers, thank you very much for helping make my job easier. Do we have any other final closing comments or thoughts? Otherwise than that, I will bring the session to a close and then find out if anybody wants to stay for networking or any other questions. I think it seems that lots of people have found it helpful and useful, which is good. Let me just bring Susan back in. Sorry, Susan, I didn't give you any prep for this, but I just thought it might be helpful either from yours or colleagues at the National Community Lottery Fund just to come back and reflect perhaps on the session.
There we go. Yeah, thanks. I think it's been useful. I mean, I've been involved in social investment in the fund for a while, and I still learn things on this. I think it was really interesting. You said you're absolutely not an expert in it, and that's why I wanted to bring as many people together in something like this to talk to people who have more of that expertise, that real life kind of knowledge of the process, you know, organizations need to go through, but also that investors need to go through. You know, though we've been involved in social investment for a while now, it's not your in the role as an investor, essentially. You know, we still are a grant funder. That's always going to be our bread and butter. But I think it's been really useful from a personal point of view. It's great to hear, you know, what's happening in the sector.
Great, lovely. Thank you, Susan. And, you know, I would say to anybody that's on this call, there are a number of different ways that you can get involved. So if you're part of a network and you think doing a Let's Talk Good Finance around a different social issue topic would be useful, please do get in touch. We ran a really successful Let's Talk Good Finance around arts, culture and heritage. So, you know, you can always access these sessions afterwards. We've got one coming up later in the week around communities against COVID. So looking about how social investment has played a role in supporting community-based organisations to take on investment even during a pandemic. We also work with networks and support providers. So we have a range of different interventions, things like addressing imbalance, where we're trying to get the conversation about taking on investment outside of the usual networks and places, you know, try and remove some of the barriers because we know that there's real imbalance out there. We also have a format called Social Investment Unpicked. So a while back, another access programme, the Connect Fund, provided grants for infrastructure organisations around sort of trying to help local organisations think more about social investment, and I got involved in delivering some of those sessions. And so my team and I thought it might be quite a good idea to get inside my head, I'm not sure if that's good or not, and turn it into an online supported learning programme. We launched it in the middle of the pandemic back in August last year. I wasn't again sure whether that was the right thing to do, but we've been quite blown away by that. We've actually just delivering our 5th cohort. We have over 75 people that have been through that. So whether that is capacity building and business support organisations, networks and membership organisations. We also have organisations like you were discussing, Susan, what we would call social investment ecosystem organisations, so often grant making trusts and foundations, people where perhaps grant making is their core work, or crowdfunding where mainly it's donations rather than repayable, wanting to know more about the spectrum. Actually, quite a lot of people who were involved in social impact bonds, but perhaps they hadn't done a wider range of things. And then also we have some frontline organisations who are thinking about taking on social investment themselves, so we want to know more. So you can always look at that if that is of interest to you. And finally, if you are an organisation that are thinking about outcomes-based contracts or social impact bonds, Good Finance hosts the Social Impact Bonds Toolkit, which was developed by Think Forward to try and help social enterprises and charities be able to navigate their way through this space. So you can find that there as well. Just want to say thank you to all of the panelists. Fantastic Q&A session. Thanks to Susan and all of her colleagues at the National Community Lottery Fund for partnering with us to make this event happen this afternoon. Thanks for Emily on tech. She always does a whiz job getting us from one place to another. And thank you to all of you. Almost 40 of us sticking with us right through to the end. I think we had 51 at our peak. And a big round of applause to the speakers. I look forward to seeing you again sometime. And if anybody wants to stay on and chat with us, just drop us a message in the chat. Otherwise than that, that's the end of the formal proceedings. Have a good